and welcome back to Breaking Waves. Very special episode today because for the first time in a while I have another co-host. His name is Aiden Samasoni Tukuitonga. He is the co-host for this episode today. He's studying law and arts at the University of Auckland. Born and raised in Mangele, son of Samoa from the villages of Awhenga, Baia, Utuali'i and Safotu. Welcome to the show, bro.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
I'm so glad that you're coming on today. And actually, I'll get you to introduce our special guest.
For this episode of Breaking Waves, we have a very special guest for today. He is a part-time TikToker, part-time fitness influencer, full-time reverend at the EFKS Rev. Today's guest, Rev Martin Mariota. Welcome to the show, Rev.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks.
I know you felt like it was a bit of a setup from Aiden, Aiden, but you know, a lot of our Pacific youth, or our Samoan youth, are part of the EFKS Church, so this is a very interesting episode for us. How's your morning been?
It's been great, yeah. It's been good.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, whataro whātu, sunga Aiden, me se fore te mai tai nei a Hana. Whape fōi le pa ia maru le au whaafonga, whaaftei fōi mo le nei avana o tuina mai, whiona whaasoa e tusa mo mataupu, e whātatau iati au. So, my name's Martin Mariota, born and raised in Napier, in the beautiful Hawke's Bay. Interesting thing about me is that yesterday was my birthday, so I've turned 45.
Oh, happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Aiden, for not remembering my birthday, but it's all good. So born and raised in Napier. Went to Napier Boys, great school. I went to Massey University, done Bachelor of Business Studies, majoring in accounting. After that, became a tax auditor for the I.R.D. for a few years. And then huge career change and went to Malu.
Tell us about that. Why did you choose to study theology?
Yeah, so my grandfather, he was whewhiao in a ngu'u called Fausanga. And when his wife passed away, he came to live with us in Napier. And because we had such a small house, we shared the same room. So I was a little kid, so I was pretty much raised by my grandfather. And, I looked up to him. A lot of times our church minister in Napier, he would give my grandfather the opportunity to do the loko. And me being a little kid, I always looked up to him and go, man, I want to do that, even though I didn't understand what he was saying. But I just kind of was inspired by my grandfather. And just before he died, when I was about 10 years old, I remember standing by the side of his bed and I said, no, Papa, I promise I'll be a whiwhiao just like you. Being a little kid, you kind of think, but it kind of stuck with me throughout my whole life. My grandfather used this book. It's a book of different sacraments. It's this little green book, and I've kept it my whole life, and now I use it in our church. So I'm the church minister for the EFKS Church in Mangele Sifo. So I still use that sacrament book that my grandfather had.
So just picking up on that point you said about not necessarily understanding him. So when you went to Malu, which for our viewers who don't know, Malu is the theological college for the EFKS Church. You went to Malu not speaking the Samoan language. What was that like? What made you want to pursue that?
Yeah, so like I said, I was born and raised in Napier, so there weren't many Samoans around at the time. So a lot of my friends were Maori and Palangis. So I grew up, not really speaking the language on a regular. My parents kind of thought, you got to speak English if you want to do well in school. So it was that kind of generation that I grew up in. So, going to Malua was a huge culture shock for me. Even though I went to church, even though I was involved with a lot of cultural things that my parents done, but I kind of took the back seat and didn't really engage a lot in it. Didn't really understand the language. Slept a lot in church, being a kid, as you do. But we didn't have cell phones back then, so we had nothing to play on during church. We just had to look at the ground, look at the seats, look at the ground, So going to Malu not knowing the language was a huge challenge for me.
What do those challenges look like?
Yeah, so before you go to Malu, you have to sit an exam. and it's a 9-hour exam. So it's three 3-hour exams that you have to sit. The first one is an English and Samoan exam. The second one is an Old Testament exam, and the third one is a New Testament exam. So you've got to sit there even before you go to Malu. So if you pass those exams, then you get to go to Malu, and then you go through the second phase, which is you get interviewed by the Aukoi'ingas, you know. So with the exams, 60% is in English and 40% is in Samoan. And I'll never forget this. So when I sat the exam, I was the only one that was sitting it for that year. And the koi'inga that was facilitating the exam, his name was Lisaki Ete. I don't know if you've heard of Ingalesi Ete, Ete, you know, the musician. So it was his father. He was the whiwhiao for EFKS Wellington. So he was facilitating the exam. And I remember sitting there looking at the questions in Samoan. I didn't really understand a lot of it. So what I done, I just kind of wrote my answers in English. And the small words that I did know in Samoan, I just write it on the bottom of the English words. Yeah. So, well, obviously I got through that. I must have just got through it.
Nice.
And then going to Samoa, having the interview with the Aukoi'ingas, my uncle, who was also a church minister, he wrote down some answers that I had to learn. But the thing is, like, I don't know what questions they're going to ask. So a lot of times I would answer the question with the wrong answer. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I made it through, but I got through, you know.
Yeah. Oh, you must have done really well then to get through that. And, you know, in my experience, there's not a lot of youth or young people, and that could be anywhere between the ages of 21 to 35, who want to study theology. There's quite a disconnection to church and to culture. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, during my time being a young person, our generation, we experienced that a lot. And like I said, the language played a big part of it, of not understanding God, not understanding the Christian faith, not understanding culture because of the language, you know. So all you do is just hear, you see, and you try and kind of understand things between the lines, but a lot of disconnect comes from not understanding.
What are you guys doing anything in the church right now that helps support that understanding and connection? Yeah.
So part of the reason why I wanted to go to Malu, like I shared before, was with my grandfather. But growing up, I was inspired to create change in the church, you know. For me personally, like, I mean, I love God, and I've always loved God since I was a little kid as well, even though I didn't fully understand a lot of things. But for me, I've always had a passion for young people to know God and be connected to God. Going through high school, you know, I've always had a passion for that. And I suppose going to Malua, in my heart, I've always wanted to see revival in my church. And I believe that God can make that happen if people's hearts are open to it. So in terms of creating change for people to be more engaged with church and more engaged with the culture, I do see a lot of things that are changing, but there's still a lot more work to do. I could only speak on my experience with being a church minister here in Mangere Sifo. So we've done a few changes. Aiden's kind of helped along the way. You know, not just by providing bilingual services. So a lot of our services every Sunday are bilingual. We use a lot of multimedia during the service as well to engage with the young people. In terms of the culture, our Okolavo, we have a Anganu'u program just to kind of help understand just real simple stuff. And I think the simple stuff, that's the best way to start. You know, like I said, when I went to Malua, I didn't understand the language or the culture, and they started me off with the simple stuff, you know. Learning the language, real simple things, you know. But I think the biggest thing for anyone that wants to learn the language, people that are listening to this podcast, that are a lot older, you know, don't think it's ever too late to learn. It's never too late to learn. I learned when I was 26, you know, so if I can learn coming from nothing, you know, anyone can do it. But it's about getting over the fear, you know, because I've always had that fear, what do you call it? Imposter syndrome. Yeah. So I've always felt that, like learning the language, I'm thinking, oh, you're not a real Samoan, you know, you're never Samoan enough to learn the language, to understand the culture. But once you get over that fear, everything just flows out.
What are maybe 2 of your tips to overcome that fear?
Find someone that's really good in the language and really good in English. You know, if someone can master both languages, I find that's really helpful. When I was in Malua, I had 2 A'oa'o Malua from Samoa, really good in Samoan, really good in English, and man, they helped me out. Like even just the mindset of the language, because there's some lines that I'll write them, because I'll have to write, you know, sermons.
Yeah.
You know, and writing sermons is like putting a puzzle together. You know, like I'll just be like, oh, how can I just say, oh, you need to have an awesome relationship with God? How do you translate that into Samoan? They're like, you know, so it's kind of like you have, I have a mindset of a Pālangi, and yet I have to speak Samoan with the mindset of a Samoan, you know, so trying to merge those 2 together, it's a cool experience, and it's a cool, what you call it, activity to do, you know, and I still have to do it now, you know, I still have to do it now, but I would find someone that's fluent in the Samoan language and fluent in English.
That's a good tip.
And also someone that you trust, that makes you feel safe to be vulnerable, because like, if you don't know how to speak Samoan and you want to go down the path of learning, it's all about having that safe space and having that person that you trust that you could just be vulnerable with, you know, because if you don't have that, then it's quite hard to just take that step out, you know.
Exactly.
Because I started speaking the Samoan language roughly around about the age of 19. And one of the advice that was given to me was find someone that you're willing to fail around. Because, you know, the best way to try is to fail, because you learn more in failure than you do on having success, right? But I do think one other thing someone did tell me, which I think you can attest to as well, is you can learn a lot about the Samoan language by just reading the Tusipaia. Like someone told me, if you really want to learn stuff from Kenesiko all the way to Whalinga, then you should be good by the end if you really read it and look at how it's written. So,
I think there are benefits in reading the Bible, but the Bible's language is quite like level 1000, you know, in terms of trying to understand. But it's good to practice in terms of pronunciation and vowels and consonants. It's good in terms of that, but in terms of understanding, then I'll probably just stick to a'ako e elefangi, you know.
If we could go back a little bit further to when you talk about fear and going to Malua, I think people might just need to understand the scope of how big of a decision going to Malua is. So you were, as you said, you were working for the I.R.D at the time, right? So you had like a stable sort of life here. You pick that all up and you go to live in Samoa for 3 years, not speaking the language you don't speak. How did you convince yourself that it was time to do this?
It's funny, I know it may sound cliche, but I just really felt that God spoke to my heart, like, this is your time to go. And then when you have that conviction, like, no one can stop you, you know, regardless of how big the change is. Once you have that conviction in your heart, nothing can stop you, And it's that conviction that will pull you through the 4 years, because the 4 years is like, man, it was tough. You know, not just about learning the language and the culture, but just even living in Samoa. Never lived in Samoa ever, you know, just living in Samoa, learning the ways of life in Samoa, like that was a big culture shock for me, you know. And there's times where I thought, man, why did I come here? You know, what am I doing here? A lot of times I'd just be sitting there like thinking, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? You know, but it's that conviction that gets you through, you know, why you're doing it, you know, because if you're doing it, like anyone listening to this podcast where your parents are going, I'm speaking to you right now.
I'm listening.
You know, if you're listening, Aiden, listen very carefully. If you're doing it to please your parents or you're doing it to please whoever, that's that conviction sometimes not enough. A lot of times it's not enough to pull you through, You know, you really have to have that conviction that I'm doing this for God. I'm doing this because I want to see change in people's lives. I'm doing this because I want to see the kingdom of God grow, you know. And if you don't have that conviction, man, I don't know how people can get through it. Maybe they can get through it with that, but in terms of going through the next phase, which is going into the ministry, I don't know how long you can last.
I feel like a lot of people think it's easy being a reverend. They're like, oh, they just speak every Sunday and then they get money from the church to survive off. But like, could you tell us what it's like to be a reverend? Like, what does your schedule look like? What commitments do you have? What the kind of people you're serving?
I'll only speak in the scope of the church that we're at now, in Mangere Sifo, because me and my wife, we also served in the Napier EFKS church when I finished Malua, and we also served in the Porirua EFKS Church. And I will say during that time, just being a normal kangaka loko, just go to the loko under another whiwhiao, that's probably the best experience that I've had. A lot of people that graduate from Malua, they don't get a chance to what they call ngalue wha, actually do a makawhale in the church and ngalue under a whiwhiao, but it's through that experience that I actually learned a lot about the ngaluenga. Malua teaches you a lot about the Bible and things like that, but in terms of learning how to do the actual ministry, it's best to go kua under another whiwhiao.
Right.
It's like that, because my whiwhiao, like Nove, Vaila'au, and Benina, and EFKS Porirua, they were amazing mentors. They took me and my wife under their wing, and they just kind of guide us along and just gave us opportunities to do things like lead the service. Like when we have a malio, he'll get me to launga, things like that. And all of those learnings, I take that and I bring that to Mangele Sifo. But not saying that I'm going to use the way we do things in Porirua and implant it into Mangele Sifo, because Mangele Sifo, it's a separate context. And the way we do the ngaluenga has to be in the context of Mangele. I can't bring things from Porirua and expect it to work in Mangele.
I think that's really beautiful, because like looking across other religious institutions or churches, they kind of apply one set method to everything, but the fact that you're catering to the unique people who are in that area is that's awesome. Yeah, it shows a lot of care in the work that you do.
Yeah, there's this thing that they teach you, it's called contextual theology. It's like you have the ministry, you have the gospel, but the way you package it in order for people to take it in, it's different in different places. So you're right. You have to be mindful in terms of where you are. Just because they're Samoa and just because they're EFKS, you can't expect that you just have this one trick pony. And this is going to work here. This is going to work here. You will fit in this box. Yeah. So I think this is a good segue into our ngaluenga here in Mangele Sifo. Like the first thing I saw, I've never heard of this church in my whole life.
Oh, thanks.
So no, honestly, I've never heard of the church, and like when we were called to this church, like, I never thought me and my wife would be living in Auckland. Like, we bought a house in Porirua. At the time, I was working for the Ministry of Education, different government agencies. My wife was an ECE teacher. So we were kind of set, kind of just living in Porirua. We renovated the house because with the mindset that we're going to be living there for a long time. And then God just said, no. You're coming here. You're coming to Mangele Sifo. So coming to this church, when you look at it, like we were really blessed to have a lot of elders. Like for me, I find comfort seeing a lot of old people in the church, because those old people, they carry all the wisdom, they carry all the knowledge, they carry all the experiences that I don't have. And for me, it's like, oh, cool, I can depend on them, you know? And I can depend on their whaukuanga. I can depend a lot on them, and I have. And I think that's that has been one of the main things that have contributed to the success of the ngaluenga so far, is having those old people just constantly, just checking in, giving really good sound advice in terms of where they see the ngaluenga going. I don't know if Aiden's told you about the pāloka. Do you know how the pāloka works?
No, I don't know yet.
So, EFKS, it's a very democratic denomination. Everything must be done through consensus, It's not like one person runs the whole show.
Right.
You know what I mean? So what they do, if they want a new whiwhiao, they have to do what they call a pāloka. They have to do a vote. So people will bring in, their guy, they'll chuck them into the ballot, and then they'll just put the names up, and then everyone will vote for which whiwhiao they want. So the one that gets the most votes will become the whiwhiao for that church. So that's how it works. So with me and Toreka, I was quite surprised that we were even in the ballot, because I don't know anyone at this church. So, and for us to actually win the ballot, I was thinking, why would you choose us?
Yeah.
It's like me and my wife were kind of young, 45. But, we're young in age, young in experience. Like, wouldn't you want an older, senior church minister and, wife and more experience in life and things like that? Wouldn't you want that for the church? But then when we had those Singa Whiangainga, I listened to the Whailokusi when he done the Molimau on behalf of the church, and he talked about how they want to see the church into the future, and they want to look for a leader that will take the the church into the future, more kind of youth focused. And for me, listening to that, I was quite, like I was thinking of, man, I came into this because I wanted to see revival. I wanted to see the kingdom of God grow. And listening to that just gave me hope. That you've got this church that has been there for over 30 years, and yet they're so future focused. They're thinking about their kids. They're thinking about what can we do for our kids so they can be engaged with worship, they can engage with God, they can engage with the culture. And we need someone that has that kind of perspective, I suppose.
Yeah. Now that's crazy. I'll be honest. I did think you were going to be like maybe 60 or 50 when Aiden said he was bringing his.
Why would you say 50? I'm like 5 years shy of 60.
It was his birthday yesterday.
Yeah. I was expecting someone a lot older, but that's quite striking to me that people vote for younger ministers and you take learning from your elders very seriously, which is pretty awesome. There was one question that's quite popular amongst the youth. That we wanted to ask you was that tattoos and being Samoan, your Malu or your pea, and how that relates to being a Christian. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, like I said, I'm not very well versed in terms of the Samoan culture. I've learned a lot in my experience in Malu and things like that. I don't really know the history about the Malu and kainga pea. My very limited understanding is that a young man will do that because they're going to be a kaulelea, they're going to kaukua i lungu. And I suppose in terms of that, I think that's great. I think you can still kaukua with your pea or your malu, for the church. There was a time where if you get a tattoo, they take your ekalesia off you. So just a bit of context in regards to that. So there's a time where a young person will go, you know what, I've accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and I would like to take the whamankunga, bread and wine. So they go through this process of being ekalesia, which means that they are able to take the sacraments of the bread and the wine. And so once they go through that process, and then they get blessed of being ekalesia, if they ever malingi koko, like if they get a tattoo or stuff like that, their kofi from being ekalesia will be taken off them. But that has yet been revoked. So now you can get a tattoo. So there's no problem with getting a tattoo and also being in the church as well. But that came from the missionaries, the Palangi missionaries that came. They saw our cultural practices. I mean, that's a separate topic. We can talk about post-colonialism and things like that. But anyway, they saw the reasons why they were getting the tattoos, and they go, you know what, that doesn't align with Christianity, blah blah blah. So that was something that was imposed on the Samoan people, But I think over time, just like anything, sometimes it takes a few generations to correct things that have done in the past. So that's been corrected. So you can still get your that's what you're asking for. You can still get your Samoan tattoo, and we won't take your whaikali. Okay.
I think just for that, if you yourself could talk to the audience, it is probably a bunch of people over the years who did choose to have tattoos before it was revoked. What would you say to them about coming back to reclaim in a way their ekalesia?
Come back. Yeah. Come back. There's nothing stopping you now.
Yeah. That's true. And also like around changes of the church is very interesting to me, because when I see churches like they apply something and they remove it, how should someone see that? Because it's easy for someone to say, oh, they screwed up, or they're not related to God, they don't hold the truth because they said one thing one time and then another thing another time. What's your perspective on that?
Well, it depends what specifically we're talking about. If we're talking about this specific talk about tattoos, I think this is a good thing. I think it's a good thing for churches because no church is perfect. Decisions that were made back in the 1800s, I mean, the way we do a lot of things in church are things that they've done back in the 1800s, and we're still doing it now.
Yeah, exactly.
So as I said before, sometimes it takes a while for churches to kind of course correct, and going back again to what I talked about in terms of contextual theology, the context of not just the place but also the time. Time changes, and over time, culture changes too. We say, oh yeah, ku mau whawai, ku mau kako anganu'u, But even the way we do those kind of things, they change over time because we're trying to be relevant. We're trying to apply things that are more appropriate to the time. And the things about the tattoos, course correcting in regards to that, it's just it's a contextual thing in terms of time. You know, the church have revised and re-looked at the purpose of having a tattoo and why it was, you know, that decision was made in the past, and they go, you know what, that's not relevant anymore. You know, we know why people get their malu or get their be'a, you know. It's a sign that they are ready to go to the family, and now they can go to the family, go to the ngu, and go to the church. So I wouldn't really see it as like, oh, no, shame, you got it wrong. But you know, I think all churches, they need to always reflect, because churches are never going to get things right all the time, and to be able to admit that something was wrong and to correct it, I think it's a must. It's a must. Because even the decisions that we make now for the church may be relevant now, but maybe in 10 years, like when my son grows up and has a makafali, maybe it might not be relevant then. So we'll have to change again, you know. And that's not like, oh, shame, you got it wrong.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, it's not that. It's that this is now relevant now. You know, what's relevant then is not relevant now. So we need to make sure we keep things relevant.
And I also think that's what God is in the Bible. He's always changed with the people, regardless of what they were doing at the time. And he was understanding of the times, and he kind of adjusted how
I think the people change. I think God remains the same. But the people change. We change. Our nature doesn't change though.
And you know what they say, it takes one generation to stop something, but like 4 to correct it and bring it back. So in terms of course correction, it's just nature plays its course. Yeah,
and I think the other thing in regards to that course correction over time, it takes new leaders to come in as well. You know, like right now I'm seeing a new generation of church leaders, not just for the EFKS, but also for the AOG, for like the Methodists, you know, a new kind of generation of church leaders that are coming in, you know, and I'm really excited about that, because the ones that I meet, we're all kind of like on the same page, you know, like we're like this is what we want, you know, because at the end of the day, it's not about EFKS, it's not about Mikisi, it's not about AOG, it's about the kingdom, you know. And I think the more we can have faith hours that have more of a kingdom mindset, we can do a lot more for our community, you know. We can do a lot more for the young people to engage in worship, to engage in the culture, you know. I think Aiden has seen this as well, you know, a lot of people that were brought up in the EFKS, when they reach a certain age and they have families, they don't go to church anymore. You know, so for me, I don't mind if someone leaves and they go to another church. That's fine. But if they leave and they don't go to church, you know, that's that person's salvation that is at risk, you know, and we need to work together, even if as different churches, to kind of support that person to come back.
Just wanted to touch on the whole youth thing and, you know, bringing more youth to God. Congratulations on the recent performance of your youth choir at the Fuimaono. It was a really fun time for a lot of youth to get involved in a different way to minister to God. So if you would just like to talk about it and maybe touch upon the journey of the youth choir.
Yeah. So when I came in, when me and my wife came in 2022, I always told the youth, hey, come join the Aufai Bese, come join the Aufai Bese, because the Aufai Bese is a mix of, majority of them are old people, you know, and we have a few young people like Aiden who doesn't come to Bese at all. He just writes out, oh, I'm in the Aufai Bese, you know. But, you know, so over time we're thinking, you know, how can we make that connection, you know? How can we get young people more engaged with singing worship songs to God? And our Safo, his name's Safo, so he's our choir master, and he said, Martin, how about we create a youth choir? And that's how the youth choir came about. So we opened this space. A lot of the young people were more willing to be part of the youth choir because it was their own unique space. It just grew from there. And that's how the youth choir came about. We always share with the youth choir, you know, it's not a performance, you know, it's not about the competition. You know, this is a platform for you to share the message of the gospel, you know, and to worship God, you know. And seeing the journey of the youth choir and them singing in church, like I wasn't a dry eye in the church, you know. The old people, you know, the ones that were more future focused, they were like, that's what we want. We just want to see our kids continue the work, You know, they were there in the 80s and the 70s, you know, building churches, you know, doing all of this. And now they look at their kids and go, oh, but what about our kids? Are they still going to be around to continue the church, continue our way of worship? And to see the youth choir, that kind of gave them a glimpse, like, we're on the right way, you know, we're on the right path. Yeah.
Yeah, and getting them to engage as well. That's awesome. And a common question that happens, that people ask, is the tithing in the EFKS churches, and also the announcing of money that people give every Sunday, right? Yeah. Don't you think this would incite a sort of pride amongst the members? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of things incite pride, you know, outside of this. But going back to the actual topic, growing up in the church, as you know, I didn't really understand things, but I did understand the money stuff.
That was one thing you knew.
I did understand with my parents, you know, like, you know, when I heard their names and things being called out. So I understand that perspective, like, why do we call things out? And in the Bible it says to give in secret, you know? You know, so I understand that perspective of a lot of our young people, and a lot of them, they get turned off from that. You know, they get like, oh, geez, you know, why are we doing this? This is not a competition, you know. When you give your kaulanga to God, you give it with a pure heart, you know, you give it with, you know, a heart of thanksgiving, you know. You're not doing it just to compete against someone else. So I totally get that, because I had that mindset, you know. I totally understand that. Coming on the other side, being the church minister and working closely with the old people, I understand their perspective as well, in terms of how they give and why it's announced. You know, and it's kind of like how we talked about the course correcting thing. You know, sometimes it takes a generation to see change. But I totally understand that the way that they've come from, this is the way that they knew. This is the way their parents taught them, you know. And if you look at what they've done, they've built churches. They've built so many things that we need to appreciate. And that's the way they've done it, you know. But is this going to be the way going forward? Maybe not, you know, but again, it's one of those things where, you know, need to reflect back and go, is this relevant now? You know, but the problem we have now is that a lot of young people, by the time they have their families, they're leaving the church. They're turned off by it. They've left the church. So there's not enough sticking around in order to make that change, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So for me, whether I lean towards this way or that way, I appreciate where it's come from, but I do understand that things need to change going forward, you know. Things need to align more in terms of the word. I understand that, but how that's going to work, we haven't come up with a solution to that. But I think part of the solution is just having the conversation.
Absolutely.
You know,
yeah.
and I think a lot of church ministers, if you're listening to this is time for us to have those conversations with our church. You don't need to come up with the solution, because I think a lot of church ministers, they feel the pressure that they need to have the answers for everything. But this kind of topic, it's about looking for the answer within the context of your church, you know. And the context of our church now is that we have a lot of old people and we have a lot of young people, you know. But who's going to be taking the church into the future? Right. It's going to be this group. But I'm talking to all of you right now, you just need to stick around.
Yeah, exactly.
You just need to stick around, because that change can happen if they stick around. But if they don't stick around, then things are going to continue this way.
And I'm very interested on how it worked for the older generation when they were building the churches, because that's a continued practice. Yeah. And what I do enjoy about it, hopping onto the opposite side, is the transparency and almost like a thanking to the people who have contributed, to show that their efforts are being recognized and noticed. So I understand what you're saying, making that transition and also even translating that to the youth. Would be difficult for you. Yeah. But how did that work for the older generation when they were building the churches? Why was that a thing for them?
Yeah, so I can't quote the book. There was a book that was written, it's a history book, and it talked about when the missionaries came to Samoa. Whoever's listening to this, if you could find that book and share it on the link, that would be great. But there was a time where the London Missionary Society came to Samoa, and they were running out of money. So the London Missionary Society said, look, we're running out of money for you to continue the mission in Samoa. You need to raise money in Samoa, you know. And so the missionaries went to the villages and they said, you know, we're going to do the special kaulanga, you know. And here we are today. You know, villages being villages, Samoans being Samoans, that we want to outdo this village, we want to outdo this village, we want to do this. So that kind of nature of that kind of friendly kind of competitiveness that we naturally all have, you know.
You see it in business as well. Like the better someone else does, the more innovative people get, the better they are productive.
So you can kind of see there the beginnings of this kind of like, we give more, oh no, we give more, no, we give more.
Right.
You know, it started right back then, you know. So that kind of, what do you call it, mentality has kind of continued, because these were the parents of our parents of our parents, you know. And to try and change that, it's going to take a while, you know. But yeah, that is pretty much where it's come from. I've seen the benefits of it, and I've seen the negative side of it as well. But like you said, you know, it's through that kind of way of giving and the way of being transparent that has built a lot of the churches that we see today. But yeah, whether it's a way forward, we don't know.
And would you say that because the EFKS Rev has a really unique position of being at the intersection of culture and the faith, that it's maybe a cultural practice that is just continued throughout, that's been carried on by the churches? Yeah, so the cultural practice of folofolanga, you know, they do it as part of the culture, you know, when gifts are given, you know, you have the kauleleo that will run around and he'll just yell out, you know, this is what's been given, you know, so that practice has been now incorporated into the church. You know, when people give gifts to God, give gifts to the church, it's follow, you know what I mean? So you kind of have this kind of, what do you call it, intertwined culture and religion. But I think what I want to say in regards to that is that the gospel must take precedent. And I think a lot of our cultural practices, it is, but if there are any cultural practices that don't, then we really need to look at those things. You know, we really need to look, does it align with the Word of God? You know, because at the end of the day, the Word of God is the ultimate authority over all things. You know, it's like the culture didn't create the gospel, you know, God created the culture, you know, so the culture must align with the Word of God. So if there are any cultural practices that don't align, then we really need to look at that, or even just start the conversation. Growing up all my life for 24 years, I've been told on Sunday morning, ko anga le loko. From your perspective, ko anga le loko, why?
Yeah, well, I have to speak in terms of a church minister's perspective. I believe that our purpose here on earth is to worship God. That's why we were created. I mean, I'll ask you a question right now, and then I'll continue. Why are you even here on this earth? What is your purpose here on this world?
For me personally?
Yeah.
For me personally, it's to glorify God through my life.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So from our parents' perspective, the only way you can learn about that is go anga le loko. You know what I mean? Like I said, that's how they were raised, and that's the best way they know how for you to understand that. You know, go anga le loko.
Thank you so much, Rev, for sharing all of your knowledge, your insight, and your wisdom with us today on Breaking Waves. Thank you, Aiden, for organizing this with us. This has been very insightful for me as someone who is an outsider of the EFKS Church. But I really appreciate how you guys think around things and how you guys adapt to times and the areas that you're in the environment. It shows a lot of care that you put into your work. But thank you so much. Just one more question, just to end this one off, is what would be your parting message?
I suppose if God has placed something in your heart, man, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You know, regardless of what barriers that you face. I mean, look at me. God placed in my heart to be a Fuimaono at such a young age. You know, when I went to university, you know, a lot of people thinking, oh man, why do you want to go to Malu for? Why do you want to be a Fuimaono for? You know, but regardless of what has been placed in your heart, people will always say those things. Why do you want to do that for? You know, why you want to do this podcast on Breaking Waves for? You know, there's heaps of podcasts out there. Why you want to do one? You know, but if you don't have that courage to step out in faith and do it, man, you're gonna live a life of regret. Live a life of regret, Aiden. Man, you're gonna live a life of regret if you don't take that step that we talked about.
No pressure.